Hello, my name is Christopher Roach, and this is the first episode in a brand new series entitled Python Power Tools. The purpose of this series is to introduce you, the Python developer, to several tools that you can add to your arsenal to make you a better, more productive programmer. My goal is to introduce you to each tool in such a way as to pique your interest and encourage you to investigate them further. Each episode will cover just enough to get you started, but we'll also deep dive into more than just the basics. So I really feel that these episodes have something to offer to both the novice and intermediate user of the tools. Introduction aside, what's the topic for today's episode? Well, during the course of the next two episodes, we'll actually be investigating two complementary tools, Virtualenv and Virtualenv Wrapper. These tools allow you to create isolated development environments that will allow you to install and upgrade software for each of your projects without actually worrying about overriding or messing up any of the dependencies between software for any of your other projects. So let's go ahead and get started by taking a look at the first tool, Virtualenv. And to do that, we'll need to go ahead and install the tool. There's actually a couple of different ways that you can do that, and we'll take a look at each. So go ahead and open up a browser, and we need to open up the Virtualenv page on PyPy, the Python package index. So now, when I was saying earlier that we have a couple of different options for installing Virtualenv, the reason for that is because Virtualenv actually solves two different problems. One of them I just mentioned a little bit ago is dependency management, the idea that you can install software for a particular project without worrying about overwriting software for one of your other projects. The other problem that Virtualenv solves is the problem of permissions. And now let me explain that real quick. Let's assume that you're at a company where you have a system administrator that takes care of all the installation of new software on that server. And of course, they're not going to give you permission to install whatever you want on there. So now you're in the situation where you would very much like to install new software, but you don't have administrator privileges. So how do you actually solve that problem? Well, one way you can do that is by using Virtualenv. And I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do that now by basically installing Virtualenv just by downloading the virtualenv.py script. And you can see it here. So just go ahead and click on that and copy the link. And then open up a terminal. And what you're going to do is just a wget or a curl just to pull that file down. So let's go ahead and do that now. And then once we have that downloaded, we can just go ahead and run the script by typing Python, the name of the script, virtualenv.py. And then we're going to give it a new name. In this case, we're just going to call it foo. And what that's going to do is create a brand new virtual environment for us. In other words, this will be an isolated development environment to which we can install any software we want without any worries of overwriting any software at the system level or even any worry about actually having permissions at the system level to install new software. And now, once that's finished running, we can see the results of our virtualenv.py script by typing ls, and notice we have a new directory here called foo, and that's basically going to hold all of the scripts and executables and so on and so forth for our virtual environment. And we can go ahead and cd into it and just take a look at everything that Virtualenv created for us. So do another ls, and we see a few different folders here. And really the only one that you need to be concerned about is the bin folder. So let's go ahead and do an ls on it and just take a look at what it has inside of it as well. And you'll notice inside of here you have all of the scripts that you're used to running at the system level. So things like easy install and pip to actually install new software. And we also have the Python executable here that you're going to be using. In addition to that, you also see a few other text files over here, activate.csh, and then one for fish, and then also an activate.this.py. And these all pretty much do the exact same thing, just depending on whatever environment that you are currently in. And basically what that is it will actually set up your virtual environment for you. So let's go ahead and open up the activate text file, and hopefully I'll be able to get you to understand better what activate is actually doing for us. And now that we've got that opened up, if we just jump down about a page or so here, we'll see the real meat of this script. And there's really not a lot that it's doing. If you notice down here, we create a Virtualenv environment variable and just export it. And basically all that does is just point to the foo directory that Virtualenv just created for us. And then below that, this is the real meat of it right here too. This is where we basically update our path variable. And all we're doing is taking the bin directory inside of our Virtualenv folder and tacking that on to the very front of the path variable. And what that means is that every time you type easy install or pip or Python, the versions found inside of your virtual environment's bin directory will be found for any other in your system, and those will be the ones that are actually running. And then finally, just below that, we have just a few more things that Activate is doing for us. And they're just small things like updating the Python home environment variable. And here it's also updating your prompt, and you'll actually see what it's doing here in just a second once we get done with this. And that should be pretty much all of it right here. Just go ahead and jump back up to the very top though, and you'll notice a function up here called deactivate, which essentially just goes through and undoes everything that our activate script just did for us. So in other words, whenever you're finally done with your virtual environment, you call the deactivate function, and what it will do will just go ahead and undo everything that the activate script did. In other words, it'll tear down your virtual environment, and it will leave you with just the normal run-of-the-mill shell that you have whenever you open up a new terminal. So now let's go ahead and see our virtual environment in action. And the way that you do that is by sourcing that activate script that we just saw. So go ahead and call source bin/activate. And immediately you notice a slight difference in your environment. At the very beginning of your prompt here, you'll notice something that says foo in parentheses. And remember earlier in the activate script, I mentioned that it was actually updating your prompt. And this is what it's doing. It's basically just putting this tiny little bit of information at the very beginning of your prompt to let you know that you're in a virtual environment and also which virtual environment that you're currently in. And now we can go ahead and just verify that we're in our virtual environment by running which Python. And you can see here the Python version that's being picked up is the executable that's in our virtual environment's bin directory. And we'll just go ahead and do the same here for pip, and we'll notice that's also coming from our virtual environment as well. So it looks like we're currently using only our Virtualenv specific versions of Python and pip and easy install and all of the things that we're going to use to develop our project in this nice little isolated way. So let's go ahead and go one step further, and we'll just go ahead and try installing something. So we'll do a pip install of Django here. And this is going to take a little while to run, so I'm just going to go ahead and fast forward through this. And there we go. Now that we have Django installed, we can actually check and just make sure that it's installed in our virtual environment by calling the pip freeze command. And we can see here at the very top, we have Django installed. And just to prove that this was installed into our virtual environment and not at the system level, let's go ahead and deactivate our virtual environment. So we'll call the deactivate function that we saw earlier inside of the activate script. And notice that the foo at the very beginning of our prompt is now gone, letting us know that we are back in our regular shell environment. So if we go ahead and call pip freeze here, we see all of the packages that have been installed at the system level. And notice that there are quite a few. So obviously we're no longer in our foo virtual environment. So now I'm just going to go ahead and jump up one directory into the developer directory that I have. And I'm going to go ahead and remove the new virtual environment directory that we just created, just kind of clean things up a bit. And now we've already seen that we can use Virtualenv by simply downloading the script and running that, but that's not necessarily the easiest way to do it. It's probably a little bit easier if we just go ahead and install the Virtualenv software. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. So I'll do a pip install of Virtualenv. And that installed without any problem. Let me just go ahead and clean up my terminal real quick. And now I should just be able to do a Virtualenv-H and see all of the help spit out here. And now there's good reason why I ran the help command, because I wanted to go through a few attributes that you might want to keep in mind whenever you're creating new virtual environments. And the first couple of attributes I want you to take a look at are the two right here. This is the no site packages and system site packages attributes. And now the no site packages attribute is actually the default one, so you really don't have to worry about that too much. It's really there just for backwards compatibility. At one point in time, you used to have to specify this if you didn't want your site packages folder to inherit all of the packages that are installed at the system level. But nowadays, that's actually the default. So let's assume that you're creating a new virtual environment, but now you actually want this virtual environment to be able to see all of the packages that you currently have installed at the system level. If that's what you want, then what you'll do is pass in this second attribute to the Virtualenv command. And let's go ahead and take a look at that in action real quick. Let me just go ahead and clean this up again, and we'll go ahead and run the Virtualenv command, and we'll pass to it the system site packages attribute that we just discussed. And then we'll go ahead and pass in the name foo again and hit that and let it go ahead and create our new virtual environment. And now that we've got that created, let's go ahead and source the activate script so we can jump into our virtual environment. And now that we're in here, let's go ahead and take a look and see what packages that we have installed inside of our virtual environment. And notice that we have the same long list of packages that we had whenever we're back out on our system level. So now what this means is that whenever you're doing anything inside of this virtual environment, you actually have access to all of the packages that you have installed at the system level. But at the same time, your virtual environment is still isolated from the system level. If you do a pip install here, it'll actually just install into the virtual environment and not the system level. What you see whenever you do a pip freeze is actually a union of the two environments, the system and the virtual environment. So this allows you to install packages that you might use everywhere at the system level and actually have access to them in all of your individual virtual environments without actually having to reinstall them every single time. Now let's go ahead and deactivate the environment. And let's look at a couple more attributes. So we'll do the virtualenv and call the help command again. And the next two I want you to take a look at are these two right here. And this is the distribute and setup tools attributes. Now, I didn't really point it out before, but if you did notice, whenever you're creating a virtual environment, one of the things it says is installing setup tools. So that's actually the default. The -- setup tools attribute is the default currently. Now, if you don't create your own Python packages, you probably don't know a lot about setup tools or distribute or the differences between them. But suffice it to say, both of these packages are basically used for distributing Python packages. Well, I should say for creating, distributing, and installing Python packages. You have used setup tools in the past whenever you do a easy install. In fact, easy install actually comes with setup tools. So this is something that you've actually used several times, but just may not have known it. Now, the current state of affairs with Python package development is very convoluted and very hard to understand and follow. But the main thing to know is that setup tools at one point in time was considered to be like the next thing for Python package development. And it's been basically taken over by distribute, which is kind of the successor to setup tools. It actually goes a heck of a lot further than that. There's actually some new ideas for how we want to distribute Python packages on the horizon. But we're not really going to discuss those here since it's just way too difficult a subject to get into. And you're really only concerned with whether or not you want to install setup tools or distribute here. So I'm going to recommend that you go ahead and install distribute in place of setup tools, since distribute is currently the package management library that is recommended for any new packages being created. And in just a little bit, I'll show you how to actually do that through configuration so you don't have to pass in this attribute every single time you run virtualenv. So let's go ahead and look at the last attribute that I want to take a look at before we move on. And you have to actually scroll up here a little bit to see it, and that's basically going to be the Python exe attribute. And that's basically going to specify the Python executable that we want copied into our virtual environment. And that's going to be the Python executable that we run every single time we run Python or any script that runs Python when we're in that virtual environment. And now the default is basically the interpreter that virtualenv was installed with. And you can see here it tells us that ours is the system level user bin Python. And now if we want to change that, we just basically have to pass this -p attribute and then specify the executable. So let's go ahead and take a look at how that works real quick with an example. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new virtual environment, but this one's actually going to use Python 3 as opposed to the 2.7 version of Python that I'm currently running at the system level. So we'll do virtualenv -p, and you don't actually have to give it the full path. You can just actually give it Python 3. And then I'll go ahead and call this new virtual environment just foobar. And notice here at the very top, we can see that it's running virtualenv with the interpreter Python 3. So it'll actually be installing that one inside of the virtual environment as opposed to the typical system version of Python. And now to prove that, let's go ahead and take a look at both the system version and our virtual environments version. So we'll just call Python -- version. And we can see here it's 2.7.3. And now we'll go ahead and activate our new virtual environment. And then we'll go ahead and call Python -- version there. And we see here that our Python version is 3.2.3. So this is a good way for you to be able to do a lot of development in both versions of Python. Let's say you have some new development that you're doing that you want to actually do in Python 3. go ahead and set up a virtual environment and pass in the Python 3 executable, and you'll be able to do everything using only Python 3, while at the same time still keeping a version of 2 at the system level and still using it for all of your old projects that you have out there. So this is a really, really nice feature of Virtualenv, especially since it's recommended that you start doing work in Python 3, but at the same time, it's not really all that feasible yet for several projects. For example, Django, although in the next version should be updated to Python 3, still currently is not Python 3 ready, and several other popular libraries as well. So now, if you remembered a little bit ago, I mentioned that you can actually configure Virtualenv, and I'm going to show you really quickly how to do that. There's actually two different options for configuring Virtualenv. The first is to actually set an environment variable for each of the attributes that you'd like to set. And the way that you do that is by taking the attribute name, replacing all of the dashes with underscores, and then prefixing that with virtualenv underscore. So I'm going to go ahead and show you an example here. We're going to go ahead and set up distribute to be the default package management library that we're installing with our virtual environment. So we'll go ahead and do an export here, and we'll do virtualenv underscore. And now the attribute has two different names. It has use-distribute, which we could do that just replacing the dash with an underscore. And the other attribute was just distribute. So we'll go ahead and finish this off by adding distribute equals true and hit return. And now if we go ahead and do another virtualenv, so I'll do virtualenv foo again. And we notice here installing distribute by default now. So if you want this to be permanent, you can just add that export statement up there to your bashrc file or bash underscore profile, or one of your startup scripts that you have. But another option is to actually use ini config files. And now Virtualenv is going to look into a specific location to find your config files, and that's basically going to be a hidden folder in your home directory called .virtualenv. And then inside of that, it's going to look for a file called virtualenv.ini. So let's go ahead and open that up in Emacs. And the very first thing that you have to have is this little tag here saying virtualenv. And then underneath that, basically you can put any attribute name here and then set it equal to whatever the actual attribute value you want it to be. So here we're going to basically make Python 3 our default executable that's installed in each of our environments. So we'll say Python equals Python 3, and then save that and jump back out. And now if I create another virtual environment called bar, we can see here that it's running Virtualenv with the Python 3 interpreter. So either one of those options you can use to actually configure your Virtualenv to automatically do whatever you want every time you create a new environment. So now let me just go ahead and remove all of my virtual environments again just to clean the system up. And I'm going to go ahead and remove the .virtualenv folder inside of our home directory just to get rid of the config. That was just more or less for explanatory purposes. And now there's one more topic that I wanted to take a quick look at before we move on to Virtualenv wrapper. And that's basically the idea of hooks. And now Virtualenv does actually allow us to do a little bit of scripting to hook ourselves into the actual creation of virtual environments. There's not a lot, and it's a little bit kludgy in my opinion, but we'll just go ahead and take a quick look at it just to see how everything works. So go ahead and we'll open up the actual Virtualenv documentation. And then here you'll notice a link that says creating your own bootstrap scripts. So go ahead and click on that. And now the way that this works is that Virtualenv actually has a function in it called create bootstrap script. And you can pass into that any string that you want. And what it'll do is it'll take that string and shove it into an actual bootstrap script like the virtualenv.py script we were running at the very beginning. And you can then emit that to a new script. And basically that'll be what you use as your virtualenv command. So let's see that in action, because that might be a little bit hard to follow. So notice down here we actually have 3 different functions that we can override whenever we create our bootstrap script. And what I'm going to do in this example is override the after install function just to show you how things work. So let's go ahead and jump back over to our terminal. And now we'll go ahead and fire up the Python interpreter. So here what we're going to do is import the virtualenv package. And now we'll create a variable called script, and we're going to set that equal to the call to the create bootstrap script function. And now we'll do the triple quotes so we can have a multi-line string. And we'll just go ahead and create our function def after install here. And remember from the documentation, it takes an options and a home directory parameter. And now what we're just going to do is print both of those out so we can take a look and see what kind of information it's passing in. So I'll do a print options, and then we'll just go ahead and do a comma, and we'll print out the options variable. And same thing below it, we'll do print, and then in quotes, we'll do home directory. And then again, we'll do a comma so we get a space between the two, and pass to the print function the home_dir parameter. And then hit return, and now we've got our script variable set. And now we can go ahead and take a look at it real quick just to see what kind of information is in there. Just type script, and ooh, that's a little bit of a mess. So let's do that again. We'll do print script. That looks a little better. So essentially, this is our new virtualenv.py file. So now let's go ahead and open up a new file. So we'll call this rbootstrap.py and make it writable, and basically just write the script variable out to it and hit return, and that should take care of that. So let's go ahead and exit out of the interpreter. Do an ls so we can see our script there. And now let's go ahead and try it out. We'll do python rbootstrap.py, and foo will be the name of our environment again. And we see here it does everything that it normally does. It installs the Python executable and distribute and so on and so forth. And then down here we see the actual output of our after install function. So we can see the options dictionary that it passed in, and also the home directory, which is of course foo. So now you can probably see where that would be fairly powerful. I mean, basically what you're able to do here is whenever you create a new virtual environment, you could put a little bit of code here that would basically go ahead and install some of the typical packages that you want available in all of your virtual environments. The problem though is this isn't the most elegant solution you've ever seen. I mean, first of all, it's actually creating a separate virtualenv script that you have to run each time as opposed to the actual virtualenv command. And then on top of that, you're actually passing in a string that defines the functions rather than actual Python code. So it's, like I said, it's not the most elegant. It's definitely a little kludgy. So we definitely want a better way to hook into the virtualenv process. And that's going to be one of the topics that we'll cover in our next episode when we cover virtualenv wrapper. So please join me in the next episode to learn how virtualenv wrapper makes working with virtualenv so much easier, and also to see how it provides us a better mechanism to hook our code into the virtualenv workflow. I'll see you then.